Here's my hot take. If you identify as a Christian and you haven't said something similar to God, about God, I would call your salvation and sanctification process into question. That's my hot take. What's going on, everybody? My name is Armond. Wake up. And I like to provide nuance to new creatures. I'm gonna just get into the shenanigans right now. Kanye West, Dolly did an interview with Big Boy to promote their album Vultures. If you've listened to the album, Vultures is a far cry from Jesus is King, Donda. In the interview, Big Boy asked him what his relationship was today with Jesus. This is what Kanye said.
I have my issues with Jesus. There's a lot of stuff I went through that I prayed and I didn't see Jesus show up. So I had to put my experience in this world, my experience with my children, my experience with other people, my experience with my account, my experience with my brand, and my experience with the level of music that I was dealing with in my own hands.
I'm not surprised by these comments at all. Since Jesus is King came out, the first question I had when we reviewed his album on my podcast, Clock Radio Speakers, who is discipling you to be more like Jesus? A sermon cannot disciple you. Going to church every Sunday cannot disciple you. You have to have someone in your life to literally walk you through the process. Traditionally, new converts to Christianity are called babies. What do you do with a baby? You got a baby? I got 4 babies. And you have to literally teach them how to do all the things that they need to do in this life to be successful. To a similar degree, that is something that happens if you become a new creature in Christ and the old man dies. If the old you dies and a new you resurrects, if we're using that language, that means you start from zero. I can't assume that you just know. I don't know what your moral compass is. I don't know what your history is. You know how I find that out? Through discipling you, through mentoring you, through becoming your big homie, your OG. I just believe that discipleship is a mandate for all Christians, right? Not just the famous ones, not just the ones that are called. And how I'm seeing people treat Kanye causes me to question how many people have actually been discipled in their walk with God. Because in my experience, when you're discipled, it produces a humility because you are exposed to the reality of you and the necessity of Jesus. You are also afforded extreme levels of grace, not only by the person who's discipling you, but you grow in your ability to discern when God himself is showing you mercy. When you receive mercy, it makes you want to be merciful towards other people. You understand, it's not ignoring it, but the empathy makes you, gives you the ability to address it differently. So I was having a conversation with a pastor homie. Something was said in that conversation. Good discipleship is hard to find. That's an interesting statement. And so I went to my Patreon. Shout out to my Patreon community. And we have these conversations all day. We have a group chat in there. So if you want to join and connect and find a safe space to process stuff, the world, you need a digital space to do that, please join my Patreon. Details in the caption, description, all that stuff, right? So I go to the Patreon. Shout out Shane, my man Shane Kidd, who is a member of the Patreon. And Shane was like, well, generally, culturally, discipleship usually happens amongst collegiate level Christians. You go to college, and that's where you're discipled, because not only do college students need to be discipled in Jesus, this is their first time being alone, out on their own. So they need to be discipled in paying bills, shopping for groceries, like everyday life stuff that they, up until this point, many of them did not have to do. So it makes sense that they would be more receptive to a discipleship. It's a more intentional and aggressive discipleship because they're young. As we get older, because we're married, we got kids, we working, we doing all the things, right? So it's very hard to break that and find someone who will walk with us as we walk with God. And then also think about it as an adult, like for many people, I think it would be difficult to be like, yo, somebody got to teach me how to be a man of God. Like, there's some ego in there. There is some ego in there. In the case of Kanye, later in this interview, because y'all are only playing one clip, but later in this interview, he talks about some of the contradictions that he saw while he was running Sunday service and, you know, during the whole Jesus is King era of his discography.
Going to the whole Jesus, devout, Paul level, fell off a donkey level religious. You have thoughts in your mind and that you hiding them from yourself. And then you sitting there and the whole choir is fucking, y'all singing about not fucking. Like, the niggas are stealing from you from the church, and it's like, man.
So essentially, he ran into some people who was funny style, and they stole from him. I'm not at all surprised that he was surrounded by opportunists. Lesser people of God attract opportunists. You know, you can see the headline, right? Like, wealthy, zealous celebrity proclaims Jesus is king. And you can see like the Looney Tunes cartoon, they're trapped in the log cabin, and Daffy Duck turns into the piece of meat. They saw a lick. And this is also something that we talked about on Clock Radio speakers, where Kanye is surrounded by literal vultures. It's very funny that this album is called Vultures, right?
He's surrounded by them. And he kind of knows it, but then he'll change his mind and he shuts down any attempt at recognizing it. Like, man, he's in a bad place.
It may have to be a thing where it blows up, because I think everybody in that room is looking for something out of that Kanye West ecosystem, universe. I always talk about how vile and ugly and nasty the music industry is. So yeah, pedophilia, yeah, you know, women being raped and manipulated, men being raped and taken advantage of. Like, yes, that exists. So why wouldn't the vultures be there when there's blood right? Like, it makes sense. But the good thing about discipleship is discipleship gives you an opportunity to ask questions. So when I hear him talk about the concept of fearing God.
You know, it's another thing I don't like in Christianity, the fear of God. If God is love, why should you fear him? Because you place one fear, you get another fear, you get another fear. What do you have at that point? You're easily controllable.
That's not new at all. I asked that question before in my walk. I didn't understand that fear meant reverence. You know who told me that? The person discipling me. We got to see Kanye's walk from beginning to now. Many of us are afforded the luxury of being able to walk with God in private. So whatever you said, whatever you thought, whatever you've done, most people don't know. Whereas we know way more about Kanye than our neighbor, the person we go to church with. Good discipleship would have helped teach him about prayer.
It's just always like, I'm gonna pray for you. And it's just like, you can actually physically do something yourself too, more than just pray. And we're so in this mentality that's all that needs to happen, but we ain't praying our way out of prison. Mm-hmm. We ain't praying our way out of the abortion clinics. We ain't praying our way to get our land back that was always ours after gentrification, after the Harlem Renaissance and Black Wall Street was burned to the ground.
I see all these comments, God is not a genie, and how dare he pray and think that God was supposed to give him everything that he prayed for. How many of us have dealt with the reality of God not responding to our prayers with what we thought he should do? How many? I know I'm not the only one. So anytime I don't hear from God in the way that I think God should hear from me, I just do it myself. So when I hear Kanye say that, why am I not surprised? Because even though we don't say it with our words, we reflect that in our actions. When we don't submit to the process of God, whatever that looks like for us individually, we're basically telling him, I'm God, I got it.
Because I'm God. And anyone who disagree, I'm the God of me, and you can't tell me who I am.
When he says the quiet part loud, we got the nerve to be upset at that? Shout out to my man Jonathan Baker. Had a song on a record that I did with him called Glass Heart. And I started that verse with, I wonder if the Pharisees knew they were Pharisees. When some define as heresy, they called it clarity. So the Pharisees always get looked at as They was on trash. They were self-righteous. They were haughty. And if you study like the history during that time, like the Pharisees were those dudes. Like they was the crew. They was Rockefeller in the early 2000s. They was the 90s Bulls. They were the Lakers. They were the guys. So when Jesus challenges them as often as he did, it was a shock to the culture. It's just very clear. People are so haughty and so self-righteous, and they just project their morality. Like you clearly need to be challenged because you haven't. And it's a different kind of challenge. It's not a challenge to produce righteousness in me. You know what I'm saying? It's a challenge to be like, yo, we need to be more empathetic of the people around us because everybody is going through. It's not that the critique is bad. It's the manner in which you critique. It lacks empathy, it lacks grace, and it lacks an opportunity for reconciliation and redemption and correction. Like, in conclusion, I don't think that this is someone who is renouncing Christianity. I do think it is someone who came to the end of the Christianity that they were presented, which is a system issue, not a Kanye issue. For me, it's less about Kanye and it's more about the people like Kanye that attempt to come into Christ and the community and the culture and all of those things that they're met with, and how they're so often a deterrent from going deeper in the Lord. And so in turn, when people make statements about the church, make statements about Christians and they're former Christians, or they're deconstructing, or they're not fans of church, those statements are never explored by the church. They're never explored by certain segments of Christians. They usually just slap down. And that's telling to me. I can use Kanye to have a larger conversation for many people who have similar experiences. They may not look like Kanye verbatim, but close enough to empathize and relate to his experience. And I didn't even get into his mental health. I didn't even touch that. Because America loves charity and America loves like the underdog story, or it has to be in a way where you have to be the savior. And it's very indicative of America. But when the mental health shows up in a way that's very boisterous in the way that Kanye's is, the grace isn't there. But that doesn't mean that the mental health issues are absent. That's just how it shows up for him, because what I see in this situation is what I see in all of our walks with God. We get to a point where our egos, our expectations, what we want, what we thought was going to happen, hits a wall. And we either have the choice of either continuing to try and walk through the wall, right? Or we say, oh, shoot, there's a door over here. I guess this isn't the way out. So can we please be more empathetic towards each other, ourselves? Everybody's going through. And I think if we were more aware of that and cognizant of that, it would show up in how we talked about people.